that climate change now is not only a trend, it's a pressing issue, and we're living it every day.
What these oil companies are doing. He knows the sort of pollution they are emitting into the air. And this is why it's called Mesopotamia. It's the land between the two rivers that was responsible for establishing one of the first civilizations in the world. And now we see the harsh reality that people are experiencing. They are unable to actually continue what their ancestors used to do. My name is Rawan, and I am a research analyst. I work for IN2, which is a research-led communication company. We do work on climate change not only in Iraq, but rather in the MENA region. My specific field is to focus on Iraq and the drivers of climate change in Iraq. But IN2 tackles this issue in terms of research, communication campaigns, education campaigns, awareness campaigns. And we do this throughout the Middle East, as well as other countries abroad as well. We have worked closely with the Iraqi government during COP28. We have also been a strategic partners with Arco MENA. So we are building a stronghold when it comes to the climate change studies and its impacts, and then building awareness here and in the MENA.
Hi, Rawan. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm good. So, what are we talking about today?
We're going to be talking about climate change today and its effect on Iraq and Iraqis in general.
Welcome to this special episode of the series of podcasts produced by IN2.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So, just to start with, what is climate-induced migration?
So, climate-induced migration is basically when the effect of climate change, whether it is extreme heat, whether it is drought, whether it is pollution and all these things that people actually experience in every day, whether they are farmers, just any regular person living inside of Iraq, experience the severity of the impact of climate change, and then think about either leaving their area and move to somewhere else better inside Iraq, or whether they are thinking of ways to actually leave the country altogether. So it is a story that really touches upon the experience of the people themselves, rather than just explaining in scientific terms what climate change is.
And I think we all agree that it's one of the most pressing problems that we're struggling with in Iraq.
Our most recent activities in terms of climate change as well, we have a new platform called Ozone Now, that is a social media platform which is educating the populations and the masses in Arabic language, and targeting Arabic-speaking countries, which is extremely important because when we talk about climate change, it is usually an issue that only Western countries talk about. And when we translate it to the Middle East and to the MENA region or Arab-speaking countries, even the terms we use is actually mostly either Western or English. So what IN2 is doing with this platform is actually tackling the problem, making it very close to home, and talking about it in very local language.
Usually how we do get introduced to climate change content is through research or scientific papers, something that is very heavy to understand. But seeing someone who's, or watching a video of someone who's speaking about that is also very relatable.
Exactly, and you're touching on a very important point actually, which is something that I experienced when I was writing the paper. Because when you talk to people about climate change, it's not climate change. They never talk about climate change as a scientific way. They talk about it as today was very hot, or I am experiencing some difficulty with my farms or with my animals because of the lack of water, because of drought. It's never climate change when it comes to the people that are living it. It's just a normal day. It's a very hard day that they are experiencing because of the effect of climate change. But the local language is very different from what experts of climate change are actually talking about.
Yeah. And also, we're not talking about a global problem that is, I don't know, threatening us for the next 20 years. We're talking about something that has already happened. I think it's universally acknowledged that climate change now is not only a trend, it's a pressing issue, and we're living it every day. And this brings us to how climate change is affecting the daily life of people. Now, we're talking about like a projected increase of 1.6 degrees Celsius and a drop in the rainfall of 10% around. That is too much.
Yeah, exactly. And you're talking specifically about Iraq. So just to also like to talk about what climate change really is, because it's global warming, it's the emission of gases, it's all these things that are leading to tangible effects that we're living in every day. So Iraq is one of the most countries that is actually vulnerable to the effects of climate change. According to the UN, it is the 5th most vulnerable country in the world that is experiencing the effect of climate change. There is a major decline in rainfall. In the past decade, Iraq has experienced at least 10% in its rainfall percentages. If we look at the surface water and fresh water in Iraq, sure, rainfall is responsible for some percentage of it. But if you were looking at the Tigris just behind us here, and both the Tigris and the Euphrates have experienced at least 30 to 40% decline in the water flow because of many reasons, including rainfall, but also diplomatic decisions between Iraq and neighboring countries, and upstream damming on the Euphrates and the Tigris. Now, to think about it, 90% of Iraq's surface water comes from the Euphrates and the Tigris. Mm-hmm. So for it to experience this amount of decrease, it is obviously going to affect the life of people. Farmers, fishermen, and anyone who is involved in the agricultural side of things.
Yeah, I mean, we're not only talking about the farming community, although it's very important economically and socially for those people who are relying on agriculture as their main source of livelihoods, but we're also talking about a community as a whole. I mean, part of the quotes that stuck with me is Ali's word in the research. He said that pollution spreads within us, cancer cases increase, and it's frightening. So we're now integrating another layer of complexity, which is the health impact.
Yeah.
The health is mainly impacted by climate change and all the other scarce resources that those families or community are fighting over, right?
Absolutely, and I'm going to take the opportunity here and introduce the people I interviewed in case someone has not read the paper. I interviewed the majority of my interviews were actually from southern Iraq for obvious reasons, as they are experiencing the effects of climate change firsthand. But I've also interviewed people from Nainawa, so north of Iraq, and another person was from Suleimania from the KRI. And they do have very common themes that they talked about. And to be honest, like you said, and dust storms were very common things that they talked about. Now, if we talk about dust storms, it is related to climate change, obviously. However, it is common in geographical areas similar to that of Iraq. But when it gets to 8 major dust storms in a year, that is way too much. There was 8 major dust storms that hospitalized more than 5,000 individuals. Now, people with these health problems, they do put pressure on a health system that is already suffering a bit. And then this is when I was also talking about when I said people, when they talk about it, they don't talk about it in terms of climate change. They talk about it, there is lack of services, we are experiencing pollutions, there is a lack of general service. And this is probably something that we will touch upon later as well, main drivers of why people actually choose to leave. And since I am talking about pollutions, I think it is actually the right time to also talk about what the oil companies is doing as well, because in southern provinces specifically, people are abandoning their jobs. Mm-hmm. Either farmers, fishermen. Someone I was talking to actually comes from a family of fishermen. So his father was a fisherman, and he had to abandon his job completely and turn to oil company. So he's now working in an oil company. And it's such a moral dilemma for these people. because he knows what these oil companies are doing. He knows the sort of pollution they are emitting into the air. He is actually an environmental activist who is going against these oil companies in his rallies and in his protest. But that is the only main source of income for people like him. So while he wants to hold on very tightly to his father's tradition and his jobs, he has no other choice but to actually join the oil companies that are causing lots of pollution in the air.
That is so mesmerizing, actually. Now, you brought this up, this generational divide where the older generation usually have some morals. They want to stick to their lands and hold on to their tradition and community, while the younger generation see that there is no chance but to leave. I mean, we're talking here about losing your main source of livelihoods. You're talking about extreme weather events that is, I don't know, affecting your daily life. We're talking about extreme heat, dust storms, scarce resources, and everything else. And you also mentioned that you talked to someone from Nineveh. I remember his words while I was reading the research. He's Sami. He said that it's not just the crops that is being impacted by climate change, but it's also the livestock farming. And I remember the words exactly. He said, there's no pasture, no water, and it's a daily struggle for survival. And that made me also wonder, how does livestock impact the farming community in the rural areas?
Yeah, it's a very important issue to touch upon because I was talking about the oil and the oil companies and what it's doing to the environment. And something important to actually discuss as well. Oil production in Iraq, since it's a rentier state, it is actually responsible for 42% of Iraq's GDP, which is huge. While comparing to the economy that agriculture is producing, while the agriculture sector is only responsible for obviously lower percentage of GDP than oil. In 2019, the percentage was better. It was responsible, the agriculture sector was responsible for 3.4% of Iraq's GDP. And it employed 11% of Iraq's population. However, this percentage is in decline, of course. As in 2023, the agriculture sector was responsible for only 2.3, which is a huge decline, and is responsible for only employing 8.4 percentage of the workforce, which is, to be honest with you, is a very sad reality for Iraqis, because if we think about the history of civilization, this is why it's called Mesopotamia. It's the land between the two rivers that was responsible for establishing one of the first civilizations in the world, because people relied on these two rivers for agriculture. And now we see the harsh reality that people are experiencing. They are unable to actually continue what their ancestors used to do in terms of fishery, in terms of agriculture, and in terms of also of livestock, because it is not just human that is experiencing the harsh realities of drought or heat or even pollutions. So when I talked to farmers, they also talked about their livestock itself, and how sometimes the quality of the animal production is actually really decreasing because of either like heat waves or because of the lack of water that the animals are unable to actually drink and then produce their products. I'm sure we've all seen the very sad images of the buffaloes in the marshes and how they are dying of thirst. So definitely it's not just only a human issue. It's major species, including animals and plants, that are dying out.
So now we're touching on two very important aspects. First of all, we're talking about people, again, who are losing their main source of livelihoods, and that leave them without any choice but to leave. And then there's also the great culture in these places that they are leaving as well. We're not talking about only people mobilizing from one place to another. We're talking about a community, a culture, I don't know, day-to-day activities that is getting lost, maybe, if they cannot perform it in the host communities. So you touched on the buffaloes. There's also these structures and the art marshes made of reeds that is going to fade away because these people are leaving their places. So I don't know if you could please like give us some more insights about the emotional aspect, the human aspect of that, and how are those people feeling after leaving their homes?
So absolutely, and this is a major part of what I explore in the paper, because when I talk to people, they were extremely emotional when they talked about, for example, the marshes or even their farmlands, either in Nainawa or in Rania city in Suleymania. People are very, very attached to their lands, especially the older generation. They are living their lives because they do like their traditions. They do like the jobs that they are performing as farmers, as fishermen. And then when they are faced with these harsh realities that they have to leave everything behind and move to the cities, it's a very tough decision that they have to make. It's not just their jobs they're leaving behind, like you said. It is entire traditions, it's entire ways of lives. And people are, when they are moving to the cities, obviously they are not welcomed with great opportunities because there's already a lot of pressure on the cities in terms of housing, in terms of job opportunities. So when people are moving from the countrysides, from farms, from the marshlands into the cities, they are experiencing a reality that is still tough. A lot of people are forced into informal settlements, for example. In Baghdad alone, there is around 1,000 informal settlements, and in Basra there is 700. There is a statistics of at least 3.3 million Iraqis actually living in informal settlements. And these are faced with lack of services. So people do not have access to clean water, for example. They don't have access to electricity, and obviously also lack of jobs. And this is what is forcing people to also leave these cities and consider another option, which is leaving the country altogether. Now, this is interesting because when I talk to people, like I said, people don't talk about climate change. So when they talk about the reasons why they are leaving, they're talking about lack of jobs, for example, lack of services. So they are all contributing factors, but it is a very complicated mixture that the reasons actually is not that clear anymore. So when we are saying people are leaving for climate change, it is because of these very services that they are lacking and then choosing to leave.
Yeah, I've even like heard that there's no agreed upon term by the IOM on climate-induced migration. It's always, there is no clear term of a climate refugee or a climate migrant. It's always multiple factors that are causing these people to leave their places. And I also want to touch on another part that is very important. The journey of migration itself is not easy. We're talking about people taking unsafe places, going through, crossing countries, and the journey itself is very overwhelming emotionally, you know? The factors, the threats that they are posing on their lives just to search for a better opportunities itself worth mentioning, I think.
Definitely. And so there's no clear research on how many people are actually leaving their Iraq and moving either abroad to Europe or the UK or other countries. IOM did a small study that is suggesting people are perhaps moving to neighboring countries. But we know from history that a lot of Iraqis do leave their country specifically for the same reasons that you mentioned, political reasons, security reasons. But one of the major reasons is becoming economic. However, when I talk to people that I interviewed and the reasons why they have left, they did talk about a lot of things actually related to the effect of climate change. I remember the person I interviewed from Basra who actually left Iraq and then lived in Germany for some time, and then he did not succeed in Germany and then had to return back to Iraq. One of the things that he said was pollution, for example. And he also said sometimes it was too hot in Basra, that it was affecting my mental health. So again, these are the reasons that is forcing people to leave. And just Another point that is also worth mentioning, just like how the issue of climate change is not regional, it's not an issue that only Iraq needs to tackle, such as the issue of migration. Because migration, whether it is happening inside Iraq or it is forcing people to leave Iraq and choosing to go to European countries, is causing a huge influx of people and causing a lot of pressure for host countries as well, such as Europe, the UK, and obviously other countries too. So when governments and when decision makers are thinking about it, they need to think about ways to tackle the effects of climate change in order for them to also think about ways to tackle illegal or irregular migration too.
Now, all what have you mentioned also touch on around the same circle, which is mental health, climate anxiety. I know that this is a new term, but it's also somehow related to all the other impacts that caused by the climate crisis. I really want to get back to the point that you mentioned, that they are losing their identity. Like if I'm migrating from my home of birth and then I'm transforming to another new life, to another new country, and I'm starting over. What I think that there's an existential crisis that is going to cause. There are people fighting back. I know that you mentioned some of the initiatives in the research where you've seen communities working to restore those marshlands or those culture of theirs.
Yeah, definitely. And it's actually, a lot of them are doing their daily jobs as a baker, as someone who works in the government, as an employee, so on and so forth. But then they are extremely passionate about actually preserving their communities. This is especially true in the South when it comes to the marshes. Lots of ordinary people are actually part of like these civil society organizations or these NGOs that are trying so hard to fight back and preserve the environment and the marshes. So I know we talked about the daunting effects of climate change and then how it's leading to migration. But there are also the untold stories of those who stay and who are so resilient and are trying to fight back.
Definitely. And those efforts definitely must be backed by other actions by the government, by the local society, by the organizations, I don't know, the global community and the international community. I don't know if you could walk us through at least what have been done from that part, from that end.
So obviously the local governments as well as international governments, they are trying to dedicate and allocate like budgets or activities to combat climate change. However, the way that people were talking, they always wanted more, just because the effect is extremely dire and it needs urgent and immediate action. So yes, while some things are happening, we still need to raise more awareness, for example. We still need to engage more governments in this issue, not just the Iraqi and the local government, but because it's such an international issue. And it is affecting both Iraq and other countries as well.
All these amazing efforts by the local community must be also backed with some support from local governments, international governments, civil society organizations, and everyone who can get involved, actually. So you mentioned in the research some key recommendations on what every single person can do to help tackle this climate crisis. Would you like to talk about them a little bit more?
Definitely. And the role of local governments, international governments is huge, just because, yes, climate action is an individual action, but also needs a huge support from bigger entities such as governments. And I think the Iraqi government, international governments are allocating some budgets. They are allocating some activities. I mean, just recently we witnessed COP29, which is a worldwide conference that talks and discusses climate change. When it comes to individual actions, like I said, we need to raise their voices. We need to enable them to actually talk to bigger entities. And this is why awareness campaigns are very important. This is why educational campaigns are actually also very important. And it needs to start from let's say, schools with children, and then also to those people who are really involved in the discourse of climate change, such as those activists that I talked to.
And if this could start, it could also begin with some people trying to communicate the problem to those people, to the bigger audience, to get everyone involved. And I know that Ozone is, of course, one of the ways to do that, but it's also the way that you write your research, the way that you communicate it to the bigger audience. The people who are not really aware of what is exactly the details of that story. It's a great way to shed the light on what are the human and the social aspects of climate change, as well as, of course, the economic and the social ones. So yeah, it gives us a look ahead, maybe. It gives us hope for the future, that the next generations are taking action. Governments are also collaborating on tackling this crisis. And yeah, there is hope for the future.
Hopefully. And communication is key at the end of the day. We do need a medium, and we do need platforms to bridge the gap between the public that are experiencing these effects firsthand and the decision makers at a government level or international level.
Yeah. I mean, communication is the way that we're going to have all those people involved, because we really need everyone to tackle this global crisis. But this gives us hope. Thank you so much, Ron, for being here in this podcast and actually communicating the story of resilience of those communities who are fighting back, who are adapting, who are struggling with emotional burden and with economic burden, but are not stopping there. They are also taking action to help restore their culture, their identity, and their homeland. So yeah, it was great talking to you and listening to all those insights about our culture and what is exactly the impacts of climate change on Iraq and migration. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.